We're privileged to have Congressman Salmon join us to make some remarks and answer a couple of questions about the Rebalance to Asia. Congressman Salmon is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia and Pacific, and he's a true Asia expert. He is the only member of Congress fluent in Mandarin. He's led multiple U.S. delegations to Asia, including several to India, and he's made over 40 trips to China. In fact, he'll be leading a congressional delegation next month to discuss trade and democracy promotion. And he's become a key voice on Capitol Hill for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the importance of that trade agreement, as we've already heard today, not only to our economic fortunes, but also to our strategic ones in the region. So Congressman Salmon will share his thoughts with us on the U.S. rebalance to Asia, where American policy should go from here, and we're privileged to have him address us today. So please join me in welcoming him.
I don't know if you're lucky or unlucky to get two Arizona boys in one day, but right back to back, what an honor to be able to be following my good senator. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak to you from the Center for New American Security and the Guam-US-Asia Alliance. I also want to thank the Asia Pacific Security Program Senior Director, Patrick Cronin, for inviting me to this event, and thank you, CNAS, President Richard Fontaine, for the kind introduction. And is that true that you really are on a work release program? I didn't know that. We appreciate this opportunity. CNAS has continually published great work on pressing issues in Asia that help inform my information and my staff's views, and I very much look forward to future products. And of course, most big heartfelt thanks for giving us Amy Chang. She's a wonderful addition. She is my staff director for the subcommittee, and I don't think I could have done any better anywhere, anyhow. I spent much of my career in public service devoted to improving the strategic presence in Asia. Started 1977, I was a missionary for the Mormon Church in Taiwan. I remember going to the Language Training Center in a cold day in January and going there on a Wednesday, and by Sunday they forbid us to speak in English anymore. We called that Silent Sunday, and we did a lot of grunting and pointing. We certainly learned Dudza which means I'm hungry, and Tseswa Zainali, where's the bathroom? Those were the first things that we had to learn just to make sure we didn't have accidents and that we were able to eat. But I lived in Taiwan for 2 years. In fact, I was there when Jimmy Carter normalized relations with mainland China and severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan. That was kind of a tough and tumultuous time to be there, but things have moved, I think, in a positive way. That same year that I was living in Taiwan came the Taiwan Relations Act, and so a little bit of clarity that we've tried to preserve throughout the years. Maybe I think sometimes we need a little bit more clarity in some areas, and we can talk about that later. But I served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee when I first came to Congress back in the 90s. I was here for 6 years, from 94 to 2000, and I was one of those goofy guys that took a term limit pledge and actually meant what he said. So I left after 6 years, stayed 12 years out, did not plan on coming back. Finally, just out of frustration, I decided to run again, and I came back in 2012. So this is my second term being back, but overall it's my 5th term in the U.S. House. And I've traveled extensively in the region, as was noted in that wonderful introduction, that I was able to be in China over 40 times, been over to India 5 or 6 times, been to Korea more times than I can count, Japan. I will be going in the next couple of weeks to Vietnam, and Senator McCain is telling me all the places I need to visit. He's helping me with that itinerary, and I greatly appreciate that. And recently, I was with the chairman of the full committee, Ed Royce, and the ranking member. We went to India. We met with Prime Minister Modi, and boy, was I impressed with him. What a breath of fresh air. Some exciting things happening in India. I think we can help nudge some things along in the relationship, but some great opportunities. This event focuses on an important topic, the rebalance to Asia, and I'm very excited to serve as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific on the Foreign Affairs. I will be strongly promoting the rebalance through the promotion of free trade, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, or TPP, the strengthening of alliances and partnerships, and the support of freedom of expression and democracy. Since President Obama announced his administration's rebalance to Asia several years ago, the United States has struggled a bit to maintain their priorities, our priorities in the region, while recognizing the significance of the Asia-Pacific fiscal austerity at home and instability and conflict, you might say inability, but instability and conflict in the Middle East have taken our attention away, and the United States struggles to convince our allies and security partners of our commitment to the region. But I can assure you, in my capacity as chairman, I'm going to do my best to help Congress focus on one of the most dynamic, if not the most dynamic, certainly economically, and promising regions of the world to continue our role as an Asia-Pacific power. So this year, 2015, is a big year for anniversaries. It'll be the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, the 20th anniversary of normalization of relations with Vietnam, and this month we have the 40th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, which I remember very poignantly. I was a senior in high school and very thankful that I didn't have to register for the draft, so that was I remember that very well. 2015 will also be a big year for opportunities. We may and need to see the passage of TPP. I know that we face some challenges, and those negotiations that are taking place right now on TPP sometimes are hindered by the fact that we haven't given the President trade promotion authority yet. We have to do a lot better job, I think, educating all of the members of Congress. Most of the members of Congress that I talk to do not have a great understanding that TPA, or fast-track authority, is something we've given every president since Richard Nixon, and that it is not some exceptional type thing, and that it is not an abdication of our constitutional responsibility to oversee any trade treaties, but it is actually an ability to have one entity responsible for those negotiations. I don't know if you would shudder as much as I would to have everybody in Congress making those negotiations with other countries, but I certainly would, and it makes all the sense in the world to have a single point of contact through USTR, negotiating those compacts, and then ultimately bringing it back to Congress for an up or down vote. That's the way it's always been done. That's the way it's going to be done. So I hope you convey to members this isn't an extraordinary circumstance. It's simply status quo that's happened for other administrations, and it's incredibly important to our livelihood. As I hear the debate sometimes from some of the naysayers on TPP or TPA, I think that they would like to pretend that globalization never occurred, and that somehow we can put the genie back in the bottle and just trade amongst ourselves here in the United States. That can't happen. And so while the United States, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but while the United States has very low tariffs, these other countries don't. And when many of them don't towards us. And when we negotiate these trade agreements, that levels the playing field so that we can trade, and it's so important. So let's all put on our best face and get out there and proselytize as best we can for trade, free trade, because it is a fact of life that we all have to live with. Some of the major strategic and security challenges that we face in Asia include the South China Sea and East China Sea disputes. These maritime conflicts are seen as a tinderbox and has the probability to escalate into a major conflict. In our recent trip to China, the chairman of our full committee, Ed Royce, had numerous conversations with the Chinese about his concerns, especially of some of the airspace issues. You know, you got those pilots out there, a lot of testosterone, anything can go wrong. And it's something we all have to be concerned about. So the conflict in the East China Sea between China and Japan about the Senkaku Islands has stabilized to a status quo maintenance. However, the number of nations vested islands in the South China Sea complicate the situation vastly. We notice efforts at land reclamation and power projection through both military and non-military vessels. The potential for conflict is high here, and we should watch the region closely. Maintaining balance between existing allies and partners in the region will be challenged by the complex and competing interests at play. For instance, the United States wants to maintain a strong military presence in Asia, but we don't want our allies and our partners to be solely reliant on the U.S. forward our presence to respond to all other countries' political or military crises. We should instead build greater capacity for Asian countries to peacefully settle their own challenges. The common thread in many of the maritime conflicts in Asia is China, and China continues to be the biggest challenge to maritime stability in East Asia. Its aggressive actions and coercion presents a challenge to the United States and other regional actors. China's behavior has implications for stability in the region, and we're left wondering how to best respond if China does not sign on to norms and rules of the road in maritime domain. In considering solutions, Congress can continue to push for common rules of the road where contention exists and ensure the administration is pursuing the United States' best interest in the region, whether it be protecting the fragile ecosystem from China land reclamation efforts or promoting the military Coast Guard capacity of countries to deter aggressive maritime behavior. One of the other issues that we all know is causing a stir among both our government and our private sector is our cyber issues. The rebalance places great importance on the safety and the freedom of global commons, but we should not just focus on sea, air, and space, but also cyberspace. And some of the gravest cyber threats that America faces come from Asia. You are all aware that just a few months ago, North Korea successfully launched a cyber attack aimed at disrupting Sony Pictures Entertainment. North Korea continues to egregiously violate international norms through this type of behavior. An attack of this kind against a private entity is unprecedented. Despite this, we still have not seen, in my belief, an effective U.S. response to the issue that would deter similar future attacks. China continues to steal and pilfer U.S. intellectual property and citizens' personal information, not only compromising our economic competitiveness, but also compromising our national security. Last week, China unveiled a new offensive cyber weapon called the Great Cannon, which targets sites and entities that pose a strategic threat to the Chinese regime. These developments are extremely distressing because of China's brazen use of tools to silence the freedom of expression that has grown exponentially, and I've seen a lot of that firsthand on my trips to China. And I think it's one of the things that unnerves the Beijing central government more than just about anything in the Communist Party is having things happen that they can't control, and the internet is a tough thing to control. These issues are complicated by the number of stakeholders involved in cybersecurity. A policy solution from the administration or Congress would definitely not be a panacea. We need more interaction and discussion with civil society, private businesses, and other nations to develop a medium to long-term strategy to deal with cyber intrusions and other malicious cyber activity targeted against the United States. We've got to focus on our alliances. We remain committed to honoring our long-standing alliances and partners with Asian countries in the region. But given the history and the nature of intra-Asian relations, we need to be wary of the potential contradictions that exist in Asia. For example, our economic relations with India. Our engagement with India has expanded with new Prime Minister Modi, and bilateral relations have been revived. An emerging regional leader and democratic country, India can be a major economic and security component in the rebalance. But we've got to maintain that relationship and form a coherent strategy for cooperation. While I was over there, some of the issues that were raised with Prime Minister Modi and some of the members of his cabinet were the intolerable time that it takes to solve disputes. 4 years is the average. So if you have a contract dispute, it takes about 4 years. So we talked to him a little bit about the possibility of forming formalized arbitration mechanisms that quickly speed up the amount of time. And we mentioned to him that we believe that we could double the amount of U.S. investment in India in a short time frame if we could deal with the fact that companies who invest don't want to see their money tied up for 4 years. And I think that that message was registered pretty well. One of the other, actually two of the other concerns that I expressed when I was over there in India, I don't know how many of you followed the fact that while Amazon can sell in India, they can only sell to companies. They cannot sell to individuals, and I think that that is a big trade impediment that has to be addressed and fixed if we're going to allow trade relations with them to flourish and a bilateral investment treaty to be ultimately successful. And then finally, one big issue that I'm concerned about is our pharmaceuticals in India. You know, because of their laws, they're able to use them to allow generics to more quickly intercede and you know, interfere with the patent time that some of our pharmaceutical companies are protected by, and quickly take those same drugs to market. And it's a big bucket of cold water on the investors and the pharmaceuticals that would like to participate in India. And I think they get that. It not just hurting our folks, it's hurting their people who need those medicines and those treatments. The continued talks between USTR and the government on this bilateral investment treaty are a good start, but there are some issues, as I mentioned, that we're going to have to overcome. Then we have Korea and Japan. While we have a treaty alliance with both Korea and Japan, the two countries don't always get along very well with one another. Just had the Korean ambassador in my office yesterday, along with some Korean dignitaries, and there's still some issues that linger from times gone by that have got to get resolved. The issue that was brought up was the comfort women issue, and I think that at some time, somehow, it's going to have to be addressed, and you know, maybe we can figure a way to move that forward a little bit in a diplomatic way. And I was always taught that diplomacy is the ability to tell somebody to go to hell and make them look forward to the trip. So that's just that's a little segue. Diplomacy is a hard art to learn, but we're working on it. History and cultural memory play a strong role in these complicated and sometimes contentious relationships. The United States, we shouldn't have to play the role of arbiter in this, but balancing the two alliances can prove to be real challenging. We got to keep our eye on that. We also face development and infrastructure challenges. Energy. Energy-deprived countries in Asia represent a significant challenge for the development and provision of basic human security needs such as clean water, transportation, and education. One example is India. They have a big challenge for a large segment of their population, with over a quarter of the Indian population living without electricity. And I've heard some speculation that it may be as high as half, for 50%. Certainly I was a little amused, but to the Indian people, it's not amusing at all when I read the speech that Modi gave saying that we need to build toilets, not temples. But when you think about the number of people in India that don't have access to a toilet, you can understand how he made that political speech. Infrastructure gaps, unfilled infrastructure needs or opportunities for China to grow its regional influence without strings attached on issues like human rights or labor protection. These types of relationships may come at the expense of the United States' values and international order. For example, Chinese-funded infrastructure among the small island states of the West Pacific have coincided with increased Chinese dominance of West Pacific fisheries. There's no coincidence there. To address this, Congress could consider diverting some of our aid elsewhere to develop infrastructure and capacity in Asia and support trade agreements like the TPP that would reduce barrier and promote economic development and growth without the over-reliance on China. And I think that's a really good thing. a very positive first step. We've got some ideological and human rights challenges. China, internally, President Xi Jinping has embarked on a brutal anti-corruption campaign to weed out political opponents, while simultaneously clamping down on civilian freedom of expression and access to information. This has also affected Hong Kong and its ability to exercise universal suffrage. And I'm going to be going on a trip in about 2 weeks, and we're going, Elliot Engel, the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, will be accompanying me with some other members of Congress. We will be going to Hong Kong, and we will be going to Vietnam. It'll be my very first trip to Vietnam, and I'm looking for it to be a very productive one. But we intend to sit down and talk with some of the dissidents and try to better understand some of the frustrations and challenges that they face. Being a person that actually was there for the handover ceremony in 1997 and having met with Martin Lee, who was one of the most prominent dissidents back at that time, and remembering the promises that were made by Beijing regarding one country, two systems. I think that to realize actually two systems, you need to allow them, the people of Hong Kong, to actually democratically select who their CEO is and not have three people pre-screened by Beijing that they've got to choose from. So I know that a lot is at stake with Hong Kong. It's a financial engine for the entire region, and it's a delicate balance, but I think that ultimately Beijing has to look at where it wants to go forward with that two systems. Burma has seen many challenges, and we're going to see whether Burma's reforms work since we lifted sanctions, and that they've been genuine in their parliamentary elections later this year. We'll see if that's worked. One positive sign toward peace and reform was the ceasefire agreement signed between the government and the rebels late last month after 65 years of internal conflict. Now, we also have a number of opportunities and strength with relations with Asia. The United States maintains strong alliances with Japan, Korea, Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. We also have strong partnerships with Taiwan, India, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries. Trade, TPP, the United States has 20 free trade agreements, 2 of which are with Korea and Singapore. With TPP, this will expand to Japan, Malaysia, and Vietnam. I am very hopeful that Congress will pass TPP sooner than later. It not only provides opportunities for our businesses abroad, but also reinforce our commitment to the Asia Pacific. How this TPP could be a major accomplishment can be seen in the case of Vietnam. The country's made many positive concessions to comply with standards in the agreement. So there's a greater likelihood that the circumstances in Vietnam, such as respect for labor laws, will improve trade conditions in the country. Taiwan, I just dropped a bill today that will allow Taiwan observation status in Interpol. I think it's common sense. We've got some serious security issues throughout the region, and it doesn't make sense that Taiwan has to depend on us or other countries to get their information on going after the bad guys. We should all be in this together. I also think we need to revisit some of the other international body issues. I thought it was kind of strange and actually bizarre that when Taiwan wanted to participate with the Ebola crisis with the WHO, that they were forbidden from doing so. There were challenges at the WHO in letting them do that. My feeling is no good deed goes unpunished. You know, they wanted to do the right thing. We should have allowed them and figured out a mechanism better without all the controversy to allow them to do the right thing. Japan. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has proposed revisiting its interpretation of collective self-defense in light of the unprecedented tension between Japan and China. At the same time, the United States and Japan have also revised their bilateral defense guidelines and will be releasing it later this month. I really look forward to hearing Prime Minister Abe just in another month, and I think most members of Congress are. India, as the world's third largest economy and major democratic power in Asia, there is immense potential for collaboration and cooperation with India, Similarly, India also seeks to balance China's growing dominance in the region, and the United States is poised to play a unique part in that space. Philippines, in April 2014, the United States and the Philippines signed the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which allows U.S. troops to build facilities within Philippines bases, and the U.S. troops are given docking and storage rights at Subic Bay, which is a strategic location in the South China Sea. While China's no-strings investment can draw a lot of attention from nations hungry for investment, its coercive and aggressive behavior in other arenas is also pushing South and Southeast Asia nations closer to us. In that sense, we should continue to foster growth of economic, diplomatic, and military presence in the region. While I'm nowhere near providing a comprehensive status on our rebalance to Asia, I've highlighted a number of challenges and opportunities that exist for the United States and our role in Asia. I strive to foster free trade, promote human rights and democracy, and support our allies and our friends in Asia. Through the Asia and Pacific Subcommittee, I aim to continue to advance our strategic interests in the region and shape alliances and partnerships to promote U.S. values abroad. Events such as this foster this dialogue that I think is absolutely essential to determine how we can better operationalize our resources to lend greater credence to our objectives in Asia, both in the medium and the long term. Again, thank you to the Center for New American Security and the Guam-US-Asia Alliance for having me speak today, and I'll open it up for a question or two if you'd like to do that, noting that I, unlike the Senator, do not have filibuster privileges, so I won't keep you way too long. Any questions? Yes.
My fellow witnesses again from Guam, I'll bring the same comment that I brought to Senator McCain. We're very big supporters of the TPP, but we would like to be included in the U.S. definition. Three territories in the Pacific are not included. The other part is with India and the additional role. Due to the buildup, the cap on H2 and H1 visas for the Guam and North Guyana was lifted for the construction coming up. But India is not a country that's allowed to participate in that.
Really?
H2B would be great.
Oh, yeah.
It would help us build our bases.
I'm not understanding the rationale behind that, but as you all know, there needs to be some major fixing of our immigration policies, all the way from H-1B, H-2B, all of our guest worker status type programs. I think our F-1 visas for education needs to be a lot of reform. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. By the way, how is the construction work going in Guam? Is it proceeding as you think it should? Right. I've only been to Guam once, but what a wonderful time. This was back in 1990, and I know a lot's happened since then, but I'd love to be able to get a chance to come back. And I would also like to figure out an opportunity, in a second round of TPP discussions to address, because there are lots of countries that we probably should have thought of including in this TPP round. What I'm understanding, this is just round one, and there will be other opportunities, and we should talk. I invite you, give you an open door to come in at any time to my office to talk about how we can go forward, both with TPP. And you're right, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that India would not be included in one of the countries. Has the cap been totally lifted, so there is no cap at all till 2019, simply because of the needs to move quickly on the construction project? Yeah, that makes sense, but I don't understand why India wasn't included. Let's talk about that. I'd love to have you come in and chat with that, and we can maybe ask some questions of our State Department and find out what the holdup is. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.